How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Storm 1000, and in this video, we're going to focus on when you should experience your first snowfall throughout each region in the United States. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content. So let's begin by taking a look at the current snow extent throughout the Northern Hemisphere, which pretty much determines how large the area of snow cover is for the Northern Hemisphere. And as you can see, right now we are seeing some snow cover throughout Northern Canada into Alaska and portions of Russia, and compared to other years, we are above average when it comes to the amount of snow cover extent for the Northern Hemisphere, and that could play a major role in terms of when you should experience your first snowfall in the United States. Because if the snow cover extent throughout the Northern Hemisphere is larger earlier during the year than what you typically experience, then we're more likely to see colder temperatures dip further southward a lot more quickly, since of course a surface that has snow on top of it heats up a lot slower than a surface without snow on it. So if there's a more extensive area of snow, then that would mean that overall it'll be colder, and that cold air is more likely to dip further southward. And it's also due to the fact that since the air is colder, that will reduce the instability, which will reduce the jet stream winds, and as well as the westerly winds in general, which would allow the polar vortex that's located right around North Pole to dip further southward a little bit more, since the westerly winds are so weak and the westerly winds aren't there to diverge that cold air to the west, and that cold air as a result is more likely to dip further southward. So when there's a larger amount of snow cover extent throughout the Northern Hemisphere, it's typically a lot colder, and we're more bound to see snowfall earlier for a large portion of the United States. So based on this fact that we're seeing an extensive amount of snow cover relative to other years, then I'd say we're more likely to experience snowfall a little bit earlier for a large portion of the United States, as some areas in the United States already have experienced snowfall earlier than what they'd typically see during a given winter, where the northern Midwest already received some snowfall, as we do have some snow cover right around northern Michigan as a result of a trough moving through. So already in some areas we're experiencing snowfall a little bit earlier than expected. And taking a look at the North Atlantic Oscillation forecast over the next several months, given that the snow cover extends larger this year, then we should expect negative North Atlantic oscillation to occur this year, because like I said, since the air is going to be colder, the instability will reduce, which will allow the westerly winds to be weaker right around the Northern Hemisphere for the cold air to dip further southward. And that's exactly what North Atlantic Oscillation forecast is forecasting over the next several weeks, where we're most likely going to stay right around the negative North Atlantic Oscillation up until January. So we should expect more jet stream dips and an increased amount of Arctic blasts, and of course snow as a result of these more pronounced jet stream dips moving through the United States this winter, which will allow for your first snowfall to most likely be a little bit earlier than what you typically see during a given winter. Now, taking a look at what happens during North Atlantic negative oscillation compared to a positive oscillation. So when there's a negative North Atlantic oscillation, the jet stream winds are a lot weaker, which means that we're more likely to see that cold air meander further southward, since the jet stream winds aren't really diverging that cold air to the west, and since the winds aren't strong enough. So as a result, we're more likely to see that cold air move further southward especially into the northeast, which will most likely make the chance of snowfall a little bit earlier for the United States than what you typically see. And during a positive North Atlantic oscillation, we see the opposite, where the jet stream winds are a lot stronger, and that keeps that cold air right around the Arctic rather than moving further southward into the United States. But for this winter, we're expecting a negative North Atlantic oscillation, which will allow that cold air to move further southward for your first snowfall to likely be a little bit earlier than what you'd expect. Now, taking a look at the Enzo outlook over the next 7 months. Of course, the most likely scenario at this point is that we will experience a La Nina, especially during the early winter months. So as a result, we should expect more jet stream dips thanks to a La Nina that's expected to stay around for the early winter months. And I think that will also contribute to receiving snowfall a little bit earlier for a lot of the United States. And taking a look at what typically happens during a La Nina, of course, we see that variable polar jet stream move southward, and that brings that cold air to the northern Midwest, as well as more moist than average conditions for the Pacific Northwest, as well as the Ohio River Valley. And overall, more likely possibilities that we're going to see significant jet stream dips throughout the northern United States. So as a result of this, combined with the fact that a negative North Atlantic oscillations expected to build this winter, I do expect that your first snowfall will be earlier for pretty much most of the United States. Now, taking a look at the drought monitor, that is another big factor we're going to need to take a look at. And you see that pretty much if you're anywhere to the west of the Mississippi River Valley, we do see that conditions are a lot drier than average, and that could play a big role in terms of when you receive your first snowfall, because of course if it's too dry, there won't be precipitation that will allow for the drought stricken areas to receive snowfall earlier. And of course, when there's a drought, it's typically warmer since dry soil heats up a lot faster than moist soil. So of course the chance of snowfall would be less likely when the temperature is warmer. And as you can see, for much of the western United States, even around the Midwest, where it's the drought you could almost consider at its worst out of the entire United States, you do see that you guys are under fairly drought-stricken conditions, and that could potentially limit when you will receive your first snowfall and could make it a little bit later than what you'd expect. However, I do eventually expect that this North Atlantic negative oscillation as well as a La Nina will eventually bring your first snowfall still a little bit earlier than what you typically experience despite the drought. However, for the southern United States, I think it's more likely that you will experience your first snowfall a little bit later, at least the southwestern portion of the United States, thanks to how powerful this drought is. There's just this big ridge that's going to be difficult to get rid of over the next several months, and that will make it a little bit more difficult for you guys to receive your first snowfall a little bit earlier. So for the southwestern portion of the United States, I expect your first snowfall to be a little bit later than what you'd expect. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Now, taking a look at my winter forecast, which I made 2 days ago, you see that I'm expecting this winter for a lot of the northern United States to be colder and snowier than average. And of course, if you're in the colder and snowy than average area when it comes to my winter forecast, then you should expect your first snowfall a little bit earlier. And I'd say the same thing for the southern United States. While I did write that it'll be more likely warm and moist, I do believe that the enhanced amount of moisture you're going to see in the southeast will allow for your first snowfall to be a little bit earlier. And despite the fact that I do expect it to be a little bit warmer overall this winter for the southeast, I still could easily foresee a major Arctic blast bringing much colder than average conditions for a short period for the southeast, where I could easily see your first snowfall being a little bit earlier, despite the fact that it might be warmer overall this winter. So definitely keep that in mind in the southeast. I do expect your snowfall to be a little bit earlier than expected, and of course in the northern United States it's pretty much a given at this point. However, for the southwestern portion of the United States, I expect your first snowfall to be a little bit later thanks to the drought that's going on. And a La Nina typically does bring mostly warmer and drier than average conditions for the southwestern United States, making it more difficult to receive snowfall, especially early during the winter. Now, taking a look at my forecast when it comes to when you should expect your first snowfall, snowfall. So already in the Rocky Mountain region, you probably already have experienced your first snowfall, as it typically occurs during the month of September. And same goes for some areas in the northern Midwest, such as the Great Lakes region. You have already experienced your first snowfall, where we have seen a trough that brought some snow right around northern Michigan. So it's pretty much on pace right now with my forecast when you should experience your first snowfall. But you see a large area should expect your first snowfall in October, and I'm including the northern Northeast as well, as I do believe conditions will get cold fairly quickly for snow to move a little bit further southward a little bit earlier. And then I'm expecting snow south of that right around early November. This includes major cities such as Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, and just to the north of the Boston metropolitan area. I'm expecting the snow to occur right around early November, which for a lot of these areas, it's earlier than what you'd expect, because in areas like Chicago, you typically don't receive your first snowfall until late November. I'm placing my prediction that we should experience your first snowfall in early November right around the Chicago area, thanks to the fact that we're going to be in negative North Atlantic oscillation, which I believe will promote colder than average conditions a little bit earlier this winter. And I expect your first snowfall to be right around late November for pretty much the entirety of the Interstate 95 corridor, which includes Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Baltimore. As in some areas, this is earlier, because typically in Washington and Baltimore, you don't experience your first snowfall until early December. I'm expecting your first snowfall to be right around late November, early December, just south of that, late December, just to even further south than that, which includes Oklahoma City and Charlotte. And then I did place the area of January and February closer to average compared to my previous first snowfall forecast, because I do expect there to be more Arctic blasts than usual this year. Even though much of the southern United States should expect warmer than average conditions, I still do expect the Arctic, at least a short period of Arctic blasts to hit a little bit earlier, which will allow for at least some snowfall to move a little bit further southward this winter for the southeast. So keep that in mind as well. So if you want even more in detail forecasts regarding when you should expect your first snowfall in your specific area, just make sure to comment down below, and I'll do my best to give you guys a more in detail forecast of when your area should expect their first snowfall. So make sure to comment down below if you're interested. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content, and I hope you guys have a great day.